going to talk about realizing EsoGuard's commercial opportunity. By design, you're going to see a bunch of similar slides. So when I get questions from Anthony or Mike, I think we're going to dig a little bit further into this. Who are these people are and how are we getting to them? What is that process? And so the first one I'd be remiss not to put up is the standard slide of the rise of esophageal adenocarcinoma in the US over the last 4 decades, which is a staggering over 500%. And before I go any further, I'm just going to tell a quick personal story. And I told myself I'm going to keep this abridged because I think it's important, but I have personal experience with esophageal cancer. As a matter of fact, in 2007, I lost a really close family member to it. He was a larger guy. We're from Buffalo, so if you guys know Labatt Blue, sometimes Labatt Blue Light, chicken wings. And it wasn't until the symptoms that Philip described, in that he lost a lot of weight out of nowhere. He was having trouble swallowing, and they couldn't figure it out for months. I remember that it took, because they'll check every place except for the upper GI tract first. And fortunately, we have a good cancer center there in Roswell. He was diagnosed with stage 3 and stage 4 esophageal cancer that also moved into his stomach. That required, as Philip described, surgical resection of your esophagus. As we say here, number 1, check your food tube. You can't live without that. And so, the story actually kind of begun and ended here. His dying wish was to get his kids to a Mets game. And so we did. We rented a van. It was my Uncle Mike. My other Uncle Mike came. Just so you know, my dad's name's Mike. My middle name's Mike. There's a lot of Mikes floating around the O'Neil family. And we drove him down here. And it was my first time driving the city, and I tell this story. I hit every cone I saw. I figured out that uptown was north, downtown was south. And we stayed at the Marriott Marquis, which everyone here knows that. And we try to stay away from that area as much as possible. He was ultimately too sick to get to the game. We got his kids there. They had really nice seats. I didn't. But they had a good time. And after we dropped him off, I said goodbye and I loved you. And I didn't get a call almost a day later, and I didn't pick it up because I knew what it was. And so we had 3 years from that date. So I lived through it. I saw it. And there was no more light beer. There was no more chicken wings. There was TPN and ice cubes. And so when I talk about what's going on here and I talk about our commercial process and what this great team is doing in the field, I'm talking about it from a place of knowing. So let's talk real quick about the opportunity. And I think, Anthony, to your point, let's kind of dig into who these people are, right? So there's almost 340 million people in the US these days. And we know that as many as 1 in 5 have heartburn, right? There is an important stat that we didn't talk about yet, though, which is almost 40% of individuals that are diagnosed with esophageal adenocarcinoma were asymptomatic. They had no symptoms to begin with. So that's important for us to talk about for the future here. So that leaves us with about 46 million addressable patients with heartburn. But let's just kind of pause there and talk real quick about who these guidelines are, because we keep talking about this. As a company, we follow around 5 US and EU society national guidelines, right, that all define who this patient population is. And in the US, we have 2 we look at. We have the American College of Gastroenterology as well as the AGA Clinical Practice Update, who not only define who these patients are, and we'll talk about it in this next slide, but they say that the use of non-endoscopic testing, they even use a picture of EsoCheck in their documentation, is on par with the current gold standard, which is upper endoscopy. Now, I will sit here and argue that the gold standard is not endoscopy. You heard Philip say it. It is a failed screening tool. Maybe it's the bronze standard, but we're right on par with that. The ACG itself, which is the strictest of the guidelines, says those individuals with GERD, right? So your precursor is GERD no matter what, plus 3 of these risk factors are all things that we know and understand. Male sex, you're over the age of 50, you're white race, you have central obesity, you're a smoker past or present, or you have a genetic predisposition. So there is a hereditary piece of this. Any combination of those 3 plus heartburn means you should be getting screened. We unfortunately know that about 95% don't. They actually never make it past Rite Aid, Walgreens, and CVS. And the few that do hardly make it to their primary care. And so when we look at that market, that's the totally addressable right here market here and today, which is 30 million people, men and women, that meet those risk factors. Now, it's important for us to understand this number as it is for Lucid in 2023, but Lucid in 24, 25, 2030 in the future, with all the work that the GI societies will continue to do, honestly, with diagnostics like ours, further identifying these patients, these disease states, and cures, this number is probably just going to rise. And to Dr. Woodward's comment, as a brother, as a father, as a son to someone, they're going to do what's best for their patients. So we have guidelines, and they're just that. They're recommendations in terms of who we should treat. So as Lishan mentioned earlier, if we look at our total addressable market, our TAM, it's pretty aggressively large, almost $60 billion. But it's true. We have a really easily 30 million patients that we can address. And I think what's important here is that for a company our size, a company in our space, in diagnostics in general, us making an impact to even a smaller part of this number is a major revenue bump for us, and most importantly, we're going to affect a lot of patients extremely positively. So I'm going to change gears a little bit, and we're going to talk about the patient journey. But I'm going to talk about it in a few different ways. The first, we're going to talk about what is the ideal patient journey? What should actually happen? We know we have societies that define who these patients are, and we know that a few of these patients, probably a lot of us, actually are in this room. We also know that right now they're not being screened. And what should happen is these high-risk patients should be referred to a specialist. Dr. Des Foley will be up here after lunch to talk about not only EsoGuard in his four walls, but how he manages this disease in his patients as well. They should get an endoscopy. They should get pinch biopsy. Maybe there's an argument that there should be additional confirmatory diagnostics in there that include AI, that include DNA, that include biomarkers. And that those should go to either a pathologist or a lab like ours for confirmatory diagnosis, and then they're managed accordingly, right? If they have cancer, they're treated. EMR, surgical resection, whatever that may be. If they have pre-cancer, we know we have proven technologies to eradicate that disease, and they can be surveilled and treated at the same time. This is our ideal patient path. This is the reality. We skip this entire piece. So I guess right here we could have put, like I said, Rite Aid, Walgreens, and CVS, that we know who these patients are. Us ourselves ignore those symptoms and we go get Tums. When we do make it to the primary care, they put us on long-term PPIs, or proton pump inhibitors, right? These provide symptom relief. As a matter of fact, they do a really good job, right? And so I don't need to show back up to my primary care because I take my pills every day and then I go home. But as we've heard from our expert, Dr. Woodworth here, that these don't stop disease process. It's not going to stop you from getting cancer. There's a lot of good clinical data to support the fact that these patients still get disease and we need to find them. And so here's the reality of what happens. High-risk patients get ignored. They end up like Uncle Mike, late-stage cancer. And now it requires what? Surgical resection and not a good life. Now we can change the paradigm. Now we introduce a triage tool like EsoGuard, where we have a well-defined population. We know where these patients are, right? I look at it as 3 buckets. The largest bucket we know is, third time I said it, Rite Aid, Walgreens, and CVS in the US. Maybe Dwayne Reed down here. And if we can get to those patients through direct-to-consumer, right, where we talk about heartburn causing cancer, that they have a better shot at making it to their primary care at least, and maybe even a specialist. That second bucket is in fact your primary care physician, right? Where we know we have tens of millions of patients that get on long-term chronic prescriptive PPIs every year. And that's about as far as they go. The smallest bucket is our specialists. We have 2 in here today. Actually, we probably have like 5, but I'm talking about Dr. Des Foley and Dr. Woodworth, who see these patients. Not a lot of them make it to. I can tell you as a patient, I had an upper and lower earlier this year. I was having GI issues. We joked about it, but when I called, it was in February, and they said, we can get you an opportunity in October. October. And so I didn't call in any favors, but I did call scheduling every morning until they found me an opening, and I got in there a couple weeks later. But that was me pushing, right? That's not the normal patient. Most of these get on PPIs and they go home and that's it. Now we have an opportunity with a non-endoscopic test like EsoGuard, with a highly accurate molecular diagnostic that identifies changes at a molecular level in these biomarkers that are known to be associated with these disease states. Not just cancer, but as Lishan mentioned, pre-cancer. And it is critical, it's existential that in the esophagus, we identify things early. If we identify them early, they can be treated. If we don't, it is a highly deadly disease. And so now the paradigm is, not only do we identify high-risk patients, but we work with where the patients are. We can dabble in direct-to-consumer now. We can certainly partner with our primary cares to educate them on this. And they're very familiar with cancer prevention, at least the term prevention as they know it, because they offer Pap testing, they refer to OBGYN, they refer out for colonoscopy, they refer for mammography, the list kind of goes on. And so when you show up with that first slide, that there's been a 500, almost 700% increase in this disease, and we have a 2-minute office-based test, I can tell you that they listen. That's great. We don't have a problem there. But I'm going to talk more about that commercial process and how we impact not only just patient education, but also provider education. And so now I'm just going to real quick kind of run through this. We have our high-risk patients. They get offered EsoGuard. Those positive patients move on to confirmatory endoscopy, where with pinch biopsy, with known molecular diagnostics, we can confirmatory diagnose that disease. Early patients are then treated, and those patients without disease go on with their life. The only reason we can do this, and the only reason we want any type of screening diagnostic for a well-defined patient population, is only as good as the proven technologies to eradicate it. And this is what we have here. We know with RF and cryoablation that these patients go on and live a healthy life. If they go through surveillance, if they go through treatment, sometimes multiple, that are fairly benign, that they do really well. And so not only do we have EsoGuard, we have treatment options as well, and we have other confirmatory diagnostics. So let's talk a little bit about the actual revenue opportunity, right? We have a room full of investors, of analysts, and actually a lot of clinicians as well. And part of what we're doing as an organization is to increase shareholder wealth, right? That's our job. And so how are we getting there? The last couple of years, we've been laying the groundwork. We've been laying the groundwork for the commercial organization and operations. We've been certainly laying the groundwork for clinical research. And we can't do anything but thank Dr. Lee and her great team for getting all that done for us. So let's kind of walk through this. I mean, there's two paths here, and these are parallel, by the way. But let's first talk about a term, patient acquisition. How are we acquiring these patients? So on this left-hand side here for me, or right, depends how you look at it, we start with the clinician itself. It might sound silly, but we go in and we do education. We talk about disease state, epidemiology in our 2-minute office-based test, and they then go and educate their patients, right? We educate them on risk factors. Most primary cares aren't familiar with GI Society guidelines, but they'll abide by them. They understand that. They're the specialist. And when we do that, there are multiple ways in which we can offer EsoCheck as a service for esophageal cell collection. The first is in our Lucid test centers, right? We have multiple Lucid test centers in and around the US, brick and mortar places where patients can be referred, much like you'd see at LabCorp or Quest to get blood draws. The second, and we'll talk about this a little bit further, is the idea of satellite testing, where we can go in and provide this service with our clinical team to these providers themselves. And in Florida, we actually have a mobile test unit that serves other purposes as well. We've also been doing, as you heard from January, these health fair type events, which we call check your food tube pre-cancer screening events, where we work with first responders, specifically firefighters, where we can go out and we can do education, we can do screening, we can work with local providers, and we can screen a large group of these people at one single time. And we have one way to a revenue opportunity here, right? And that's through traditional claim submission, where we collect insurance information, we process the DNA, and we send that to the payer. And while doing that right now, we're a little bit, begging for forgiveness, right? Because up until now, we haven't had the tough discussions about medical policy change. We'll talk about that in later slides. But let's go over to this next one, right, where the patient acquisition looks a little bit different, where we can contract directly with a corporate entity, a union, a municipality, any type of business, where they can offer this as a covered benefit. Again, going back to press releases from earlier this year, we started this process with a automotive group in San Antonio, Texas, where they saw the need. As a matter of fact, they unfortunately went through a bunch of cancer diagnosis. And when we talked to them about this, they were really excited. Not only were they excited, but we did a health fair for their employees, and they were even more excited. We were able to contract with them directly, right? And there's really only one way at that point to grab the DNA. And it goes back to all the hard work that this team has been doing to coordinate, to organize our CYFT events, because now we can apply that directly to the corporate entities as well. So all this direct contracting that we're doing, we're going to leverage the existing process that we have, led by Martin Sasaki and his team, to drive additional revenue opportunities. That's either through a traditional claim submission process like we see over here, or directly contracting with that corporate entity. So talking about the actual operations themselves, right? We've acquired these patients. How do we screen them? We do have Lucid test centers. Second time you've seen a slide up here with these. I always think of white, clean, Freddy, right? Patients walk in, they meet our nurse practitioners, our clinical specialists. We do additional education if possible, and we deliver EsoCheck. We administer that for esophageal cell collection. The next is this idea of satellite testing. So I have the state of Arizona up here. Some might argue it looks like Nevada. That's not for argument. It's Arizona. And we have our Lucid test centers in the general Phoenix area, right? But most patients will only drive around 20 to 40 minutes, unless you're going to a specialist like Dr. Woodworth, in which case they will take patients from all over the world. And so what we're able to do is use the Lucid test centers as our home base. That's where we work from. And we're able to go out and do satellite testing, hour, 2, 3, 4 hours away, where we build relationships with providers. We educate them on all the things I described, risk factors, epidemiology, even treatment. And then we set up days, and we go out there, and we offer this as a service. So we're offering not only education to these individuals, but a service to them as well, which is the esophageal cell collection. In Florida, we have a van that drives around. Obviously, clearly this supports some type of marketing purpose, but it also hits on some compliance issues as well. So there are creative things that we can do, and I can tell you that prescribers, clinicians that we work with in Florida love this thing, because we get to park it in their parking lot, they get to talk to their patients about it, and it goes back to the practice of medicine and the business of medicine, which is educating patients, getting them treated, but also this is what they do for a living. So going back to the Uncle Mike story. So the one thing I didn't talk about is my Uncle Mike was a firefighter. As a matter of fact, my dad is as well. So where we are in Buffalo, there's probably 600 full-time firefighters and probably 3,000 in the surrounding areas. My dad's still active. He's 67 years old. He probably shouldn't be, but that's neither here nor there. And I hate to admit, until I got this photo, until January, when we had the opportunity to screen the San Antonio Fire Department, where we did almost 500 people in 2 weekends, did we ever do a Google search to identify the fact that firefighters specifically are at a much greater risk of esophageal cancer. Now, firefighters know that they're at risk for a lot of cancers. They think about, well, at least we think about mesothelioma and lung cancer because they're around carcinogens all day. But the clinical research doesn't show that the carcinogens are causing cancer in this specific group of individuals. As a matter of fact, what it's doing is it's causing heartburn. And we know that heartburn causes cancer. So not only is there an increase in risk, there's an increase in mortality as well. And so, I'm proud of what our team has done this year, not just operationalizing what we're doing, but positively affecting these first responders' lives. And this is a large pool of patients that we can continue to, and we're just getting started. So here's our CYFT events, right? And as I mentioned, not only do we offer education, but we work with local providers. We work with primary care to do education. We use this as a jumping off point. We work with gastroenterologists, who are gonna get referred these positive patients. Same thing with foregut surgeons who may be referred patients for treatment, like that for GERD. Our team shows up on site. We stay organized. In some cases, we work with our telehealth partner to provide clinical oversight while we're on site here. And if anyone's ever seen these pictures, right, they used to be white boxes, they're blue now. Every single one of those boxes is a patient, right? So if you're on social media, and you see all these boxes, that means we just had a really good day. So I try not to use the term marketing when I think about, what we do around here. I like to use the word education. How do we affect and educate our partners, those providers, those clinicians? And first and foremost, I like to thank the team, because without the team that we have, led by John Rubano, led by Martin Sasaki, we wouldn't be anywhere. This is a picture from our national training meeting earlier this year. This is a mix of our sales reps, our clinical team, some accountants, our laboratory team, getting together for 3 days of education and obviously a little bit of fun, and I did not win this bocce tournament. But that's the first and foremost thing we have to say. The second thing we have to thank is John and his team for being so organized. We're defined and we're prescribed in everything that we do in the field. We think about 3 things out there. First is people, second is process, and third is performance. We bring people in, we train them, we get them out in the field. And it happens really quick. And we have a lot of tools. It's extremely sophisticated what we do. We know what to do and we know how to do it. This is not a problem for us right now. And then obviously we have to thank Freddie. For those of you who haven't met Freddie, our walking, talking stomophagus, you should. Get on YouTube. He serves a really important purpose, right? Freddie goes around and tells people to check their food tube. He educates them on the fact that heartburn causes cancer. And it's very effective. We've seen it through direct-to-consumer. We see it every day in our physician offices, right? So we have a problem here. The problem is out of sight, out of mind. If we walk into a primary care office who needs 28 hours in a day to do their job, and we talk to them about heartburn causing cancer and EsoGuard, I promise you, because we do it all the time, they're like, this is great, we're gonna do this. But you know what happens when we leave? Well, they wanna forget, but we don't let them. They end up with banners. They end up with posters. They end up with patients reading this stuff. And again, when I think about sophisticated marketing campaigns, but more importantly, educational campaigns, we do it well. And I'll tell you a quick story about a patient by the name of Scott that was out of, was it Idaho? I could be wrong there, Idaho. Scott saw one of the posters in the previous slide. It was Freddie, and there's bubbles all around him with risk factors. And he goes, Doc, I think I have like all of these things. I should get checked. And the doctor said, you know what, you do, you should. And they administered EsoCheck right then and there. EsoCheck a few weeks later came back positive. He got referred to a local GI, right? And so the process worked. We had a change in medical decision making. And by the way, the gentleman who prescribed the test was his allergist, believe it or not, in his office. So prescribed the test, he got the test done, it was positive. He gets immediately referred to a GI. His local GI says, from what I see in the biopsies that I took, it looks like you have disease. It looks like you have dysplasia, actually. And so the next part happened. Medical decision-making change. I'm going to refer you to a specialist. As a matter of fact, he went all the way to Salt Lake City, and he saw a specialist there, and not only was he diagnosed, but he's been treated. So here's a situation where it wasn't just the physician, but the patient themselves seeing our educational material and prescribing based on a conversation with their provider. This slide for me speaks volumes to what I just talked about. The fact that we know how to do this. We've been doing it on a quarter-by-quarter basis, but ultimately, I'm going to get the question, I might get it right now. Shaun, why don't we have Super Bowl commercials yet? You know, how do we ramp this up? And I'm here to tell you we don't have to. We're not there yet. We're not even half on the pedal. Maybe we're a quarter, an eighth. This data is important for us in our market access process. I think it's probably my next slides. It's about having claims data, claims submissions. Without having a seat at the without having claims data, we have no seat at the table, right? But by having claims data, and more importantly, the clinical evidence that Lishan's going to talk about, clinical validity, clinical utility, analytical validity, you know, that our test is actually working, that combination is important. That's what we've been doing here. But I used the term transformative earlier, right? That fiscal year 24 is a transformative year for us, and what that means is it's our job now to meet revenue with the same ramp here, by doing direct contracting, by taking the base level clinical research that we have and going to payers and starting to work on medical policy change. So let's talk about that real quick and then I'll get going here. I do have a little bit of a superpower. I was trying to catch up. I can tend to talk pretty fast. If you guys haven't figured it out, I have a lot to say. But fortunately, this is a webcast, so we can record it. You can slow it down. You guys can get back to what I was saying. So market access is this fancy term that everything has to do with our ability to submit claims to payers and how we collect those monies, right? And so what does that actually look like? You have your traditional claims process. We talked about this a moment ago. And then we have our direct contracting, right? So I'll start the other way first. Direct contracting, you know, and we have Jim Fricchione here who just started 30 years experience in doing just that, contracting directly with employers. Talking about this as being a covered benefit in creative ways where we can go and contract, do carve-out policies so that these employer groups can offer to their employees this cancer screening, right? We're hearing more and more about this. We're not the only ones out there. We're the only ones doing pre-cancer detection, and we're the only ones with, and Lishan will talk about it next, the ability to to identify pre-cancer at such a high level of sensitivity. But let's talk a little bit about our traditional claim submission process and where we're winning and where we're going, right? There's really two pieces in my mind. There's the operational piece, which is your revenue cycle management. That's general claim submission, right? That's taking those denies and getting them in appeals. That's potentially using prior authorization. This is just being operationally efficient. This is where we're winning right now, and we'll continue to. It's just going to keep getting better. But as we're moving forward here, and as you have people like Natalie up here later talking about market access, where we're moving towards is leveraging all the clinical and ongoing clinical research that we have with payers, right? Our commercial payers as well as with CMS. The next question that always comes up, what's going on here? You know, we started this process back in 2019. You know, we went through the CLF process, and we worked through the AMA to get a CPT code for EsoGuard, 0114U, right? Thinking about market access, you got your coding, you got your payment, and you got your coverage. So we got our code. The next thing we did is we went and we submitted our payment dossier to MolDX. For those that don't know who MolDX is, Palmetto GBA is a Medicare-approved contractor out of South Carolina. They are contracted directly with CMS to do all the heavy legwork, right? They're the MD and PhDs like Suman over here that, you know, run their own labs and understand the sophistication of tests, and they set payment rates and they set coverage policies. So the next was payment. We got our payment, $1,938.01, and I'll never forget that 1 cent because we worked hard for that one. And now what are we working on? The third piece was just coverage, right? I mentioned it, we'll mention it again later. We have a base level of data. Analytical validity, which is how does your test work in the intended population? Clinical utility. Are we changing medical decisions? Are prescribers prescribing this test? Are they getting those patients to the specialist? And then finally, analytical validity. Is what's happening in Suman and Martin's lab actually happening? And so, yeah, I'm here to tell you the time is now.